this Ohio State Buckeye.
Morning, guys. Thank you. I was so pleased with yesterday and your guys' willingness to engage me in a conversation. I really, really appreciate that. And so I want to invite you to do exactly the same thing today. I want to continue our conversation about faith that lasts. And I'm going to test this morning your commitment to make this interactive and talk to me because I want us to think about how sexual sin impacts faith. And I know that when I bring up the topic of sex, that very often that shuts the crowd down. So I'm worried about that today. And if you want to join me in worrying about it too, that's great. But I really don't want to talk about this by myself. So we all just kind of let the topic sink in and then buckle up and let's have a conversation about this. Can I tell you why I want to do this? 2 years ago in the summer, I was invited to speak at a lecture program up in Dallas. Had about 300 young people who were there. And this is what I was assigned to talk about: sexual sin. And fortunately, that was just a lecture, so I wasn't depending on anybody to give me any feedback. But when I got finished, I got a lot of feedback. It was almost exclusively from young people who attended, and they all said the same thing to me, and it really made a powerful impression on me. Kids came up to me afterwards, and this is what almost everyone said. They said, "Thank you for talking about that." Again and again and again, the kids came up and said, "Thank you for talking about that." And some of them added, "Nobody talks about this. Back home in my church, in my Bible class, sometimes even parents are not talking about this. And we really need you guys to talk about this." And so I have to tell you, it just redoubled my commitment to go to that awkward place, because I'm hearing from people like you, young disciples, trying to do the right thing, and they're saying, "Y'all don't talk about this. And we really need you to." And so I'm committed to that. And I'm willing to take a risk that I'm going to stand up here and look at zombies for the next hour and just lecture. I could do that, but it will not be very exciting for you. But I do that because young people said, we need you to do it. I'm wondering this morning, I want to start with this. If you can see the connection between what we talked about yesterday and what we're talking about today. What I mean by that is this. Does sexual sin have anything to do with whether or not your faith lasts? What is the connection between those two things? Will you just kind of let that simmer in your mind for a second? And then I'd love to just start by brainstorming that. What is the connection between sexual sin and the enduring nature of your faith? How do those two things go together? Do you have any thoughts about that? And see, that's exactly what I was afraid y'all would do. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That was so courageous to be the first one to jump in there. Start the landslide. Go ahead. So in sexual sin, we're giving our bodies to something other than God that just starts pulling us off in that direction. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Who else will jump in? Yes, sir. Interesting. So did y'all hear all that? Walk through all of that. Sexual sin makes you feel guilty and unworthy and separate from God and maybe even not worthy to come back to God. And so there just is the kind of the splitting away of that relationship. That was vivid. Thank you for sharing that. Who else? I saw a hand up down here. Yes, sir. Yeah, so I keep hearing some repeated language. Thank you for that. Over and over again. This idea of it pulling me away. Are y'all hearing that? When I get involved in sexual sin, it's pulling me away. You talked about that connection with God, guilty, separate, not worthy to come back. I like all of that. Keep thinking about that. Yes, sir. All the way back here. Yeah. I want to, a couple of y'all have said something that I think is super important. Thank you for that, by the way. And I regret that our time is limited and I can't just talk to you just about this. But I do want to at least put this on the table so you know that is there. Sex is not a bad thing. And I don't think we've said that enough in the church. Who made us sexual? Yeah, guys, this is Genesis. Genesis 1:26. He made us male and female, right? And so, guys, the desire you feel when you see a beautiful girl, God designed you to be attracted to her. Ladies, the desire you feel for a guy who is attentive and caring, where did that come from? God created us to feel that way about each other, to desire the opposite sex. In fact, there is a whole book of the Bible that actually celebrates intimate sexual relationships in marriage. Who knows what it is? Song of Solomon. How many of you had a Bible class in high school on the Song of Solomon? Wow, we are making progress. Usually that is zero. I am so glad to see some of you have done that. We have a quarter in our Bible classes where we teach our teenagers the Song of Solomon. There is a lot of blushing in that class, right? It's a very awkward book because that's exactly what he's doing. So y'all know that I know that, and that needs to be explored and talked about. This is from God. This is good, right? The problem is getting it off in the wrong setting, in the wrong way, and we wind up messing it up. Let me explore a couple of things with you. You guys did a terrific job with that. Thank you. You put some wonderful ideas on the table for us to explore this morning. I think there are two things that I see when I talk to young people about the impact of sexual sin on faith. Some young people end up walking away from God because they think God's boundaries about sex are too narrow. We've already said God made us sexual beings. We've already said that sex is a good thing, but he also set boundaries around these powerful desires. And some people, even some disciples, think the boundaries are too narrow, and I don't want to live within God's boundaries. So, for example, if you grab your Bible, go to Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13. I'm going to kind of hang a lot on this text this morning. This is kind of one of the fundamental, basic things God says about sexual desire. Hebrews 13, verse 4. Marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. And so there's one of the boundaries, right? This is one of the things that God said about sex. I've created you to be sexual beings, but I want that to take place within the boundaries of a marriage with the person you are married to. That's one of the limits God placed on it. And there are people who think that that boundary is just too strict. For example, there are people who think it's ridiculous that you guys can't have sex. Who think it's ridiculous that you're supposed to wait all the way up until you get married. And to them, it becomes more ridiculous as young people wait later and later to get married. Y'all know how old the average guy is when he's getting married today? Anybody know? Take a guess. 20? 26? 30. The average guy in America is getting married at 30. You're supposed to wait all the way through your 20s? And people just think that is absolutely unreasonable, ridiculous, not possible, right? In fact, I really want y'all to hear me on this. If there's one thing I hear more from your generation right now about sex than anything else, it is that it's just sex. It's not a big deal. It's not this magical, special thing. It's just a function of the body. It's like eating and digesting food. It's like hearing sound and taking it in processing by the brain. It's just sex, no big deal. In fact, in doing some of my research on this, I read some forums online where people from the world are arguing about these issues. And I came across this guy who made this comment. This is what he said. I pushed the button and nothing happened. There we go. He said, watch this. The moment I realized sex is like any skill, you have to practice until you get better at it. That's when I really started questioning the religion I grew up with. The fact that they say it's a magical thing with the right person is untrue. So notice the very last thing he said. The very last thing he says is, there's nothing special about this. It's just a function of the body, right? In fact, he says it's what it is. It's a skill. It's like learning to shoot free throws, right? How do you get good at shooting free throws? You go stand at the free throw line. Any of y'all play basketball? Yes? And so what do you do if you want to be good at free throws? You stay after practice and you shoot free throws over and over and over again. This guy said sex is just like that. So you really ought to have sex with lots of people. Lots of practice so that you'll be good at it. And so notice, in the middle there, he said, when I put this together, I realized that what I'd been taught in my religion, that just wasn't true. See the connection between sexual sin and faith? See how it goes together? Some people argue that it's actually better not to wait until you're married to have sex. That in fact, if you're going to get married, you ought to have sex first to be sure that part of the relationship works. And so another guy I read on the forums made this comment. He said, I feel it's an important part of a relationship that should be evaluated prior to marriage. We, talking about him and his wife, only discovered how different we were sexually after we were wed. It caused a lot of issues and some lengthy marital counseling to overcome. So when I read that, I wonder, does his wife know that he said that? Because it sounds to me like what he was saying was, if I would have known how bad she was in bed, I wouldn't have married her. That didn't work out too well for us. By the way, can I just answer what's dumb about that statement? So I want y'all to hear me on something. It does not matter who you marry. It does not matter who you marry. Whoever it is, however compatible you are, you will have stuff to work on. That's part of it. That's what happens when two become one. When you blend two lives, there are going to be some rough places along the way. In fact, this part of the relationship, certainly every couple, as they're figuring out sex, are going to have some things to work out. That's part of the process of being married to each other. So actually, this is a silly argument that this guy is raising, okay? That's just part of being married to each other, is working out your stuff and blending your lives. But anyway, there are people out there who think it is too narrow and too restrictive to say you ought to wait until you get married. Another objection that people have to God's standard, another reason they say it's too narrow, is because it prohibits homosexual relationships. And that is a big deal in our culture today. So in Romans chapter 1, it's one of several Bible texts we could go to. In Romans chapter 1, verses 24 to 27, that little segment there, God is crystal clear on this. There's no mistaking what he's talking about there. He talks about men being with men and burning in their desire for each other, and women being with women and burning in their desire for each other. And what God says about that is it's unnatural. In other words, that's not the way I designed this to work. In fact, let me just, as an aside, tell y'all something about homosexuality. It doesn't matter what argument you make in defense of it. It's going to be a losing argument, okay? It's unhealthy for the people who get involved in it. And there's just a ton of statistical data that backs that up. It is not good for culture. You just kind of know that when a lifestyle will eliminate humanity from the planet, right? If everybody was gay, we would last a generation. You with me? I think what Paul is arguing in Romans is, guys, if you look at anatomy, you ought to know how this works. It isn't natural, okay? That's the point that he's making. But I have to tell y'all something. Culture will not like that. And culture is going to push back hard against you on that. And it is not just that culture is going to say, well, I disagree with you about gay people. Culture is going to listen to what I just said and call my words what? Homophobia. Or, thank you, judgmental. Thank you. What else? I'm sorry? Stupid. I like that. Who said that? Do y'all realize that there are countries in the world like our neighbor to the north where what I just said is hate speech? I could go to jail for saying that. That's how far this has gone. And so what I have discovered is that because homosexuality has been largely embraced by culture, most people are okay with that lifestyle, and not just okay with it, but they don't like folks coming along and not being okay with it. And so you and I feel lots and lots of pressure to go along with culture because when you speak up about this, people aren't going to say, well, I disagree with you on that. People are going to say, I think you're hateful. I think you're a terrible person. I don't think you're like Jesus. And so there's lots of pressure that puts on us to go along with the voices of culture. And I know some disciples who got tired of sitting in churches and listening to people say the kinds of things that I just said to you because they didn't want to be judged a hater. And they didn't like somebody condemning their gay friends. And so they walked away, right? So the voices in culture are strong on this. Listen, when I was reading the forums, it was amazing how intense the language is. People protesting against how horrible purity culture, what it is, what a terrible thing we're doing to young people by depriving them of sex before they get married, how unreasonable that expectation is, how you're being deprived of having fun. I really worry about that one. I really think the devil's fundamental tactic since the beginning is lying. I think the devil wants to lie to you about sexual sin. I think he wants you to look at your friends and say, they are having fun. And I am missing it. And I'm getting older, and my season is passing. And I'm not having fun the way that he is. However it fits for you. Yeah, I think, let's just talk about up until you get married. How about that? Pretty safe? Under 30? Yeah. See the problem? Okay, so one issue is that people really think God's boundaries are too narrow. Culture is working on you about that. Now, I want to give you a second reason I think sexual sin impacts faith. And it's going to sound a lot like the first one, but I really am trying to nuance this and trying to get you to see something else. So see if you can see this with me. Second thing I want you to ponder is this. I think some people walk away because God's boundaries are preventing them from doing what they really wanted to do anyway. And I think this one is really about us. I think this is where young disciples really struggle. That God's boundaries are preventing me from doing what I really wanted to do anyway. I actually talked to you a little bit about that one yesterday. When we were talking about why people walk away, we talked about the problem of sin, and I kind of talked to you about that chart, right? So I think what happens to us is we're dealing with desires that are very strong. Sexual desire is a very strong passion. Are you with me on that? And so God has set these boundaries around it, the kind of things we're just talking about. No sex before marriage, no homosexual relationships. But those desires are strong. And as a result of that, sometimes we push past the boundaries. And how do we feel when we violate God's boundaries? Yes, guilty, ashamed, embarrassed, fearful. By the way, it's right to be fearful because these are actions that have big consequences. Even if you're 14 years old, this could be life-changing stuff, right? So we're guilty and afraid and embarrassed, and we hope no one will find out. And you would think if those are the feelings that sin generates, we would never go back there again. But what's the problem? Yes, why is temptation a problem, though, with sexual sin? Yes. Yeah, keep going back to pleasure. This is what keeps the cycle going. You spend an hour looking at porn and you feel terrible about that. But when it's all over and you're dealing with the guilt and the shame, your brain also retains the memory. But, oh, that was really nice. And so those memories start tugging at us and starts pulling us back there again. And so what I want you to see is we just start this cycle of being lured by the pleasure, violating the boundaries, feeling bad about that, but then being lured by the pleasure again. I had a question, though. Yes, right here. So that's kind of the place that I wanted to go to about this because I think you can't do the cycle forever. Are y'all with me on that? I don't think you can do the cycle of forever because there's just this dissonance. In fact, we talked about this early on, this kind of living in two worlds. And I think you could do that for a season. I think you could live in two worlds for a season. But eventually, guys, this just breaks you down. This is a terrible way to live your life. You're just constantly going between this cycle of pleasure and guilt and pleasure and guilt and pleasure and guilt. And I think something has to give. You can't continually live with that dissonance. And so a lot of time what happens is we cave to the pleasure. You see it? And then I start saying things like, well, I'm not sure I really believed in God anyway. Or, people at church are mean to me. Or, there's a story in the Bible about a talking donkey. Who believes that? And so what gives is faith. Because you can't do both. See the problem? And so I think that's why some people ultimately start walking away from Jesus. I think we throw up other excuses to delude ourselves, but what really is underneath that is, I don't want to give up my porn habit. Or I don't want to stop sleeping with my boyfriend. And so we end up walking away. I think that sexual sin can have a huge impact on whether or not faith lasts. I think the two do go together. Okay? So I like you to think about these objections that people raise and what you would say about these. Do you want me to give y'all the first crack at commenting on these? What do you think about these? How would you push back against these objections that lead people away? Wow, all the way in the back? Yes, ma'am. Nice loud voice so I can hear you. I'm old. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for that. And I think that's one thing actually that the Song of Solomon will help us with is pushing back against the cultural idea that it's just sex and reattaching the specialness to it that God attaches to it. And I know in my teaching, when I talk to our young people back home about this, that's one of the things that I try to emphasize. If you read chapter 4, which displays a couple on their honeymoon together, and finally having waited, enjoying that experience, attaches that specialness that God intends for that. Thank you for that. What else would y'all say about it? How else would you pull back? Yes, sir. Interesting. It's like they know in their heart this isn't what I'm supposed to do. That's interesting that you say that, because I studied with a guy a few years ago that, so you really need to be thoughtful about what you post on social media. I didn't know the guy. He just showed up at my office to study, and so I was kind of snooping on his Facebook page, and it was pretty obvious that he was shacking up with a girl. And when I eventually brought it up in the study, he was like, "Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with that, right?" And the more we talked about it, it was funny, because that's exactly what kind of came out. It's like, even though he put up this front of, "I know there's nothing wrong with that," inside you could really tell he knew there was something wrong with that, right? So it's almost like people know, don't they, that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. That's curious. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you for that. Can I run with that a little bit? Because I think there's a really, really important idea right there in what you just said. One of the problems that I have with these objections people raise is they're not knowledge based objections, they're not wisdom based objections, they are desire based objections. In other words, what I mean by that is people are saying this not based on knowledge and wisdom, but on what they desire to do. So I want to give you all a life principle here. Please hear me on this. If you're writing stuff down, write this down. This is really, really important. You do not ever want to be led by your desires. You want to be led by knowledge and wisdom, right? Knowledge and wisdom need to govern desire, not desire govern life. Are you with me on that? You want your life to be led by knowledge and wisdom, not by desire. When you let yourself be led by desire, you are in for a catastrophic failure in life. Life does not work that way. Listen, God has put all kinds of passions inside of me and you. Think, for example, about anger, right? Anger's just bad, isn't it? Who said that? No, right? That's exactly right. Who made us to be able to get angry? That's how you were created. That's how I was created. Listen, in the right setting, anger is a good thing. It's a trigger. Anger makes us do stuff. So you see someone being mistreated, anger stirs, and you step up and intervene and protect them, right? Something like that. Anger is a good thing. And yet, what does the Bible say about anger? See, God put some boundaries around it. So Ephesians 4, that you just quoted, verse 26, be angry. Pause there. Be angry, God says. I made you to be that way. There's a time I need you to be this way. But then what does he go on to do? He goes on to set some boundaries around that. Be angry, and you said it. Do not sin. What else did he say? Don't let the sun go down in your anger. Don't hang on to it for a long time. Don't give the devil an opportunity. So watch what God does. He says, I gave you that passion, but I'm putting up some boundaries. And I need you to respect my boundaries, okay? What happens when you let anger get beyond the boundaries? Sorry? Yeah, this is road rage, right? This is road rage. I could have road rage in Tampa, guys. Wow, I thought Houston traffic was bad. No. Tampa, way worse. I got to get out of this town immediately because I'm going to start having road rage incidents, right? That's when people get mad in traffic, like someone cuts them off, and so they pull out a gun and shoot them. That happens in Houston like once a week, mainly because in Texas, everybody's got a gun. Someone makes you mad in traffic, just shoot them. There is a word for that. What is it? Stupid. You're going to go to jail forever because someone got in front of you in their car? That is dumb. Why would you do that? That's what happens when anger gets outside the boundaries. You with me on that? You see that? So sexual desire. Sexual desire is a powerful passion, right? And God, read Song of Solomon 4, tells the lovers on their honeymoon, drink up, enjoy, embrace this experience, celebrate within my boundaries. You got to work within my boundaries, right? So whenever those passions and desires get outside the boundaries, that's when we start getting in trouble. You with me on that? And the concern that I have is the objections you're looking at on the slides are all about desire. They're driven by desire, not by logic and reason, wisdom, and knowledge. Okay? By the way, you know what's interesting to me? Everyone agrees that sex ought to have boundaries. You realize that? Everybody. I don't know of anybody in culture that doesn't think there should be no boundaries at all. You ever thought about that? What are some of the boundaries that just about everybody agrees on when it comes to sex? Sorry? Rape? Okay, so the positive side of that is consenting, what? Sorry? Yes, consenting adults. When it comes to sexual boundaries, almost everyone in culture believes it has to be between consenting adults. So number one, do not mess with kids. What do we do with you in culture if you mess with kids? Yeah, forever. And we're all happy about that, right? Lock them up forever in a terrible, dark, awful place, right? Yeah, we're good with that. You don't mess with kids. That's a boundary. Everybody agrees on that. And the other one is consenting. In fact, you mentioned rape, but it isn't just an objection to rape. We don't even like coercion and pressure. There's powerful messages against that in culture, right? So consenting adults, everyone agrees on that boundary. You know what other boundary everyone agrees on? And this is interesting. I shouldn't say that. Most everybody agrees on. No cheating. Do y'all realize that? Culture agrees on no cheating. And so even though about 1 out of 5 married couples winds up having adultery in their marriage, almost everyone agrees you shouldn't have adultery in your marriage. Once you say, I do, that's it. You don't get to play the field anymore. It's just with that one person. In fact, you don't even have to be married. If you're in a dating relationship, like a committed relationship, you don't get to go out and find somebody else. No cheating. Isn't that interesting? Even though I can use some of their same arguments to suggest cheating is actually a good idea. If you use culture's arguments, right? Why if it's not realistic to expect people to be monogamous? I may see another girl that I like. Why isn't it okay to go sleep with her too? Why are you setting these limits on me? It's just about having fun. Why restrict fun? And maybe my experience with her will teach me something that'll make my marriage better. Are y'all okay with all that? Y'all are listening to that and saying, that's dumb. And he says it with his wife sitting in the room. Why don't those arguments work? I'm sorry? Yeah, it's the same thing, yeah. It's weird to me that with all of the boundaries that have gone away sexually in culture, there are still these boundaries that people keep holding on to. No kids, must be consenting. And once you're committed to somebody else, you can't cheat. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I think that's right. Can I go somewhere deep with y'all? Will y'all hang with me for a second? Because this is so, so important. Behind so many of these surface issues, there are really bigger, deeper spiritual things going on, and it's critical that you see this. We always have a problem drawing lines and setting boundaries without God. Will y'all hear me on that again? We always struggle as a culture to draw lines and set boundaries when you don't have God. How do you do it? Because there's no one who has a right to make the rules for everybody. So why is the line drawn with kids? And you do realize there are already voices in academic culture who are saying, I don't really know that we ought to have the line about kids. We're even developing psychological language about that. You need to be concerned about that. Culture's really getting depraved. And what's wrong with the people who are saying that? Why did we set the line there? Why does it have to be consenting? What's really wrong with adultery? Why are we drawing a line there? How do you draw that line without God? Who gets to say it goes there? And why are they right? You see the problem? See, you and I as believers have a much easier time setting the boundaries. You know why I draw the lines where I do? Let me explain it. It's really, really simple. Number one, I draw the lines where I do because I believe, there it is, that there's a God. And I believe that God is the creator. And because God made me, he has the right to tell me what to do. I belong to him. I am his creation, which means there is somebody who has a right to make the rules for all of us, and we all have to do what he says, right? We've got that covered because we believe we're God's creation. Secondly, I believe that God made us sexual beings. Genesis 1:26 and 27. He made us male and female. There's nothing dirty about sex as it was made by God. God made us the way that we are, okay? Number three. Wait, before that. Back up to number two. God knows how sex works. Better than anybody. Why? He's the creator. He's the one that made us that way. Number three, as the creator, he gets to set the boundaries. That's Hebrews 13:4. Marriage will be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed will be undefiled. Who said that? The one who made sex, the one who made us. But this last one is the linchpin in this. So will y'all really zero in on this principle? God, I don't know why that happened. God's commandments are rooted in his love for us. That means that whatever God says about sex is for my good. I will be better off if I respect his lines. And I would just suggest that if you can pick up your head and look around at culture, I think that's pretty obvious. If I could look up from the screen with the images I shouldn't be looking at, or look up from the relationship where I'm having sex that I shouldn't be having, and look at the world today, I think it's pretty obvious that we are not doing better with sex because we stopped listening to God. Do y'all believe that? Are you with me on that? Can I just cite some evidence to back that up? What has the world's view of sex gotten us? An epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases that nobody's talking about because we don't want any rules to govern sex. But it's out there. An epidemic of teen pregnancy that dramatically alters people's lives forever in most cases. All kinds of problems with divorces related to sexual immorality. Listen, these are the things that are tearing apart the fabric of our country. We're destroying our families. And it's rooted in our lack of respect for God's rules about all this. Number two, the hookup culture. Where two people meet at a party or at a bar and they feel some chemistry and they go back to the dorm room, they sleep together, they get up the next morning, they go their separate ways. No big deal, right? You know, they've researched that. And listen, the impact is especially dramatic on girls. 2/3 of the girls go away from that feeling ashamed and embarrassed and guilt-ridden and empty because of that experiences. They're not better off because of that. They're hurt and broken by that. It's interesting to me that nobody is talking about the epidemic of young men, and this is all over the world, the epidemic of young men that are struggling with sexual performance. Like I'm talking about guys in their late teens and their early 20s that can't perform anymore. In fact, in some countries, that is a bigger problem with late teens and 20-year-old boys than it is with old men. Why is that? Because pornography is burning out your pleasure systems. They don't work anymore. It's not the way God designed for it to be. And frankly, guys, it's popular in culture today to say that you could have gotten out of bed this morning and said, I think I want to be a girl today. And you could really be a girl. Culture believes that. Do we honestly think they have anything to offer us when it comes to sex? That they've got the answers. By contrast, I think there's abundant evidence that God does have the answer on this. In my research, I came across some interesting studies. Let me just give you a little bit of the data that I found as I wrap this up today. You know, this is what culture laughs at. If you're committing to be a virgin on the day you get married, culture thinks you're an idiot. Okay? Now let me give you some data about people who enter culture as virgins. Number one, they are more likely to be happier in their marriage, statistically. If you enter marriage as a virgin, you are more likely to communicate better. You are more likely, if I could get it to come up. I don't know. Maybe it's, I'm not, there it is, look. You are less likely to consider divorce. In every way, your marriage is better. But watch this, because this one blew everybody away. It just doesn't work with the psychological community. You are more likely to have better sex in your marriage if you go into your marriage as a virgin. So much for the idea that it's a skill you need to practice before you get married. That just isn't true. It's not true biblically. It's not true statistically. In fact, watch this. The more sexual partners you have before you get married, the more likely you are to fail in your marriage. How does that work? Isn't that crazy? That's exactly why that's true. It creates a natural bonding. So people sleep together, and that goes on for a little while, and then they break up, and they go find someone else, and they sleep with them. And then they sever that bond and go find someone else, and they do that over and over again, but then they stand before the preacher, and they say, I do, and we say, nobody else. But that isn't the pattern of life that people have developed. And it's hard to break the routine that you've created all the way through life. See, folks, God is right about this. He has always been right about this. And we figure that out in one of two ways. Either through wisdom and knowledge and learning and faith, we come to believe and recognize God is right, or we figure it out through stupidity and suffering. I stupidly listen to the world, I go do dumb stuff, and I suffer because of it. I need to say one more thing. I got 1 minute, right? Steve, you're not that old, and you're talking about my years of preaching, so you don't need much time for the next hour. It struck me as I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you today. And listen, I only want to believe the very best things about the people sitting in this crowd. But my problem is I know the numbers. And I am very afraid that I'm talking to somebody in my crowd today that has already failed. And you already have a nasty porn habit, a long one maybe. Or you've already slept with a boyfriend. And I'm really, really afraid you're going to walk out of here just feeling like a failure because I've been really harping on sexual sin. And I'm even worried that that contributes to people walking away and not coming back because I just blew it. And there's no coming back from that. And so I just want to tell you you're wrong about that. If you have failed, here's what I want to say to you. That's the reason Jesus came. To extend grace and mercy and forgiveness to the penitent and to give us an opportunity to start over. And so if you have failed, what I want to say to you is that there is redemption and there is rescue, and you can turn this around and you can begin again. But I also want to say to you that at the core of all of this conversation is really not about sex. Underneath all of this is what you believe about God. Do you believe God loves you? And do you believe he's seeking what is best for you? And that the boundaries come from his love. They're there to protect you, keep you safe. That's what I want you to think about when you leave here today. What do I really believe about God? Thanks for coming. I'll see y'all tomorrow.